On June 5, 1944, in England, thousands of Allied paratroopers were preparing to fly to France. All of them had to infiltrate enemy territory to sabotage it from within. The men knew very well that this type of operation could end with the death of several of them. Usually, the planes in which the paratroopers traveled were targets of Nazi artillery fire, exploding in the air before reaching their destination. It was midnight and the troops were aware that those could be their last hours of life. Many were concerned, more focused on how to survive than ensuring the success of the mission. It was then that their jaws dropped as they saw a small group of men making their way through the crowd. They were paratroopers, but their attitude was different. They walked confidently, laughing and wearing their faces covered by camouflage makeup. Most striking of all was their hair, almost entirely shaved, leaving only a mohawk crest at the top. What few knew was that these men were known as the Nasty 13 and were the most dangerous soldiers in the U.S. Armed Forces. Soon enough, they would all find out why. It is not news that all our information is available to anyone on the internet, and that happens because there are brokers that are in charge of compiling all your information and selling it to other companies or people who request it to offer you something, spam you, or for even worse reasons. Aura will identify these brokers and remove all your private information. It will even remove you from spam and robocall lists. Aura also monitors your emails and passwords to see if they were involved in a data breach and exposed on the dark web and gives you recommendations on what to do. Plus, it has a VPN, password manager, credit monitoring, and just about every internet security tool you'll ever need, all in one app. You can register using my code, aura.com/militaryhistory, or by scanning the QR on the screen, and try the application for 2 weeks, completely free of charge. Check how many brokers share your information and don't wait any longer to protect it. You can thank me later. I'll leave the links for you in the description and in the comments. And now, let's continue with today's video. World War II was the bloodiest conflict of the 20th century, and warring nations recruited millions of soldiers to fight. All men able to run and use a gun were welcomed into military life with open arms. This same rule applied to the U.S. Army, which could not afford to spare anyone, not even troublemakers and petty criminals. This is why Jake McNeese, who would become the leader of the Nasty 13, ended up being part of the soldiers destined to defeat Hitler. McNeese was born on May 24, 1919 in Oklahoma, USA, into a family as large as it was poor, and which suffered severely from the ravages of the Great Depression. As a child he learned to fend for himself, and learned to hunt and fish to bring food to his brothers. He began working as a teenager, first as a firefighter and later in the construction business, where he learned to handle explosives. Shortly after graduating from high school and the United States entering World War II, Jake McNeese found himself embroiled in a serious scandal. He had always been a rebellious young man with a tendency towards physical violence, but this time he went too far. While in his hometown, he got into a fight with a man whom he easily subdued and, unable to control his rage, gave him a savage beating that left him on the brink of death. The police were after him, so to avoid jail he enlisted in the army, in the parachute unit. Around 1942, the Americans were experimenting with paratrooper units, whose task was highly risky, since they had to jump out of a moving plane and land in the middle of enemy territory. For this, the soldiers received intense training, which only 10 out of 1,000 men surpassed. The troops deployed by parachute did not have much chance of surviving either, since, from the ground, they would be attacked by machine guns and artillery that would kill them before they hit the ground. Not everyone was fit to be a skydiver, but Jake McNeese was convinced it was an ideal role for him. Once he jumped out of the aircraft and infiltrated behind the German lines, he believed that he would have a free hand to do whatever he wanted, since there would be no officers keeping a close eye on him. During the training period, McNeese remained as rambunctious as ever, spending his time getting drunk, disrespecting his superiors, and getting into bar fights. Very soon he met other young soldiers who were just as rebellious as him, and they formed a group known as the Filthy Five since, instead of using their rations of water for bathing, they used it for cooking. Despite his faults, he was never kicked out of the army, with one officer going so far as to say, "McNeese doesn't hurt anybody, and the day will come when we're happy to have him with us." Time would prove him right. By 1944, the group had grown and were now the Filthy 13. One day the leader appeared with his face painted in camouflage makeup and his hair cut in a mohawk, so everyone imitated him. Thus, when the parachute division traveled to England to later invade France, they already wore the particular aspect that caught the attention of the entire army. On June 5, the Filthies, along with hundreds of other paratroopers, boarded the planes that would take them to Normandy. McNeese's group was given the mission of blowing up the Douve Canal bridges and then holding the position at any cost. The aircraft flew over the North Sea in peace for 20 minutes, when they were then attacked by German artillery. Everything turned to chaos when the Filthies' plane was intercepted by a shell and went into a tailspin. The men had to react quickly and jump prematurely to avoid being killed in the explosion. There was fire and smoke everywhere, the cockpit lights turned red, and McNeese witnessed one of his comrades, Willie, get trapped in the plane after his parachute opened prematurely. The leader of the Filthy 13 had no chance to help him. He jumped, and behind him he heard the explosion that engulfed Willie. Survivors of the attack gathered on the banks of the Douve River and blew up some bridges, as required by the mission. Their last task was to guard the main canal bridge and repel the Germans. The Filthies dug a trench in the ground, set up their shelter there, and for 3 days held off the Wehrmacht. Just when they thought they had the situation under control, something unexpected happened. The U.S. Army, convinced that all the paratroopers had died, ordered the bombing of the bridge that McNeese's men were guarding. The Filthy ones managed to get to safety at the last minute in their dugout, but although they survived, they were trapped alongside a battalion of 700 Germans who were patrolling the area. A German messenger approached them carrying a white flag and offered them to surrender. McNeese flatly refused, offering the Germans to capitulate before suffering a humiliating defeat. The Nazi commander, enraged by the response, launched the attack, and for hours attempted to storm the position of the Filthy 13. The Americans were around 40 men, they were undercover, and they had machine guns, ammunition, and mortars. The Germans were attacking from open ground, so the battle was a carnage that caused hundreds of casualties among the Nazi ranks, after which they had to withdraw. Despite setbacks, McNeese's men succeeded in the mission. In the years that followed, the Filthy leader took part in more military operations and became one of the few to survive 4 parachute jumps. He was decorated numerous times and, at the end of the war, he worked in the U.S. Postal Service. He passed away in 2013 at the age of 93. By then, both Jake McNeese and the Filthies had become a legend in the United States Army for their ferocity and courage. We reached the end of the video and we want to ask you, do you know another unit as fierce as the Filthy 13? Leave us your answer in the comment box below and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history.